Welcome in, everybody. This is your self-care staffing for Tuesday, April 14th, 2020. I am Lou Pascal. I'm the school social worker in the Manchester City Schools in Manchester, Tennessee. And I'll just give you all a heads up that this is going to be a more lengthy video because I got to thinking about what might be good for a topic for today, and I thought about something that was really a challenge to my self-care for a long time, and that is caregiving. So, as I've said before, my husband and I don't have children, but we did spend several years of our lives caring for elderly relatives, and a lot of what we did was what I would call like second string caregiving. We were not in charge, but we did some of the miscellaneous tasks that need to happen or are nice to have happen when you are caring for family members. But we also had some situations where we were the primary caregivers. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I know how hard it can be to practice self-care in the midst of caregiving. So I thought that I would share some of the things that we found to be helpful. And I don't intend this to be like a downer. It's more of a message that you're not alone. It's more of a caregiving pep talk. It's more of a caregiving pep rally. So that's the tone of what I want to say today. I am completely aware that caregiving for children and caregiving for elderly relatives are not at all the same or not the same. I do think that there are a lot of similarities, as I've said before. That being said, try to think of what I'm saying in the context of elderly relatives and see if any of it would be applicable to the situations that you are experiencing. So again, there's a big difference between caregiving for children and caregiving for the elderly. Honestly, again, not to be a downer, but if it's end of life caregiving, you're doing some similar tasks that you would do in taking care of a child. And in some ways, you become the parent when you're caregiving, even though, it might be your parent or your grandparent or an aunt or uncle or whatever. Somehow you become the parent and you become the grown-up of the situation, and that is what can be really stressful about it. It's because you've always kind of counted on that person to be the authority, and now those roles have reversed. What's can be very sad and hard about caregiving for elderly people that is not the same as caregiving for children is that hopefully, as you're raising your children, you are looking towards some really positive outcomes. You're looking towards graduation from high school. You're looking towards them going to college, or you're looking towards them getting a job and being able to support themselves. But really, if you're caregiving for an elderly relative, you're not going to have those same positive outcomes. I think you can structure your mindset so that you see the end positively in a way that you help them to have the best last days and end that they could have. So I think you can find a way to have a positive perspective on that, but ultimately you're walking the road toward losing them if it's an end of life issue versus raising your child, which in most cases you are working towards them having some really exciting things happen in their adult life, like getting married, buying houses, that kind of thing. So just some general thoughts about caregiving along those lines. Let me be the one to say to you and validate for you that caregiving is difficult in normal times, much less with all of the complexity that comes from living through a pandemic. I have not done caregiving in a situation like we're in now, and it was extremely difficult without all this. when we did it. So I can only imagine what that's like, but I know it's difficult even under the best of circumstances. And I think sometimes it's just helpful for us to just have that awareness that this is hard. This is really hard. And sometimes if we can just tell ourselves that or sit with that, somehow it makes it, somehow that's comforting, I guess, to just know that it being so difficult is a normal experience. Caregiving is difficult in the United States because I think our infrastructure for caregiving could be improved a lot. It's difficult at best, and then there are just a lot of things that we kind of don't have in place here in the United States that make it difficult. So another thing I want to share is that anticipatory grief is a thing. So anticipatory grief is the feeling of grief occurring before an impending loss. So grieving someone who's still alive. For me, it was a feeling of wanting to savor all the time I had with that person that I loved. Those feelings of realizing it might be the last time. And then also knowing that I would never be ready for that person's death. I would never be ready. So that's anticipatory grief. So if you're kind of feeling a lot of sadness and it seems maybe to you over the top, you might ask yourself, is this perhaps anticipatory grief? And I think that that is a coping mechanism for us. We kind of brace ourselves that that end is coming, and we kind of start to kind of have that grief process. That's just an opinion. Another thought is that sometimes caregiving is a sprint. Things can happen very, very suddenly, and it can really be over before you know it. If you have a loved one who has a stroke or a heart attack, or, you know, a very short hospital stay, very short illness that you kind of didn't see coming. So in a sense, it can be a sprint. In another sense, it can be a marathon. It can be the long goodbye that goes on for years and years and years. So, and that's hard too, because we don't know. We don't know if this is going to be a few weeks or if this is going to be a process that takes years. We don't know, and that makes it difficult. Some caregiving issues are unsolvable. And I think this is another one of those things that if we can just have this realization and remind ourselves that some of these things are not solvable. It just is what it is. Somehow that can be helpful. So in my personal caregiving experience, I found it very hard to live with not being able to fix it. Even when my logical mind knew that me being able to fix it was completely unreasonable, I wanted to fix it, and it was very difficult to not be able to fix it. But that's just the bottom line. There are some things that you can't fix, and that's what makes it so sad. You can feel a lot of emotions during caregiving, including guilt and even relief. And these are all natural responses. It is also natural to have a critical inner voice and to be very hard on yourself. We talked about that just a few minutes ago with the idea of not being able to fix it. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes, the critical inner voice and kind of your self-concept as you walk this road of caregiving, and how monitoring and adjusting what is going on in your mind is a very tangible method of self-care. Caregiving can very easily trigger your fight, flight, or freeze response, and it can flood your body with cortisol. Increased levels of cortisol on a long-term basis can be problematic in your body. And when you're in that stress response, that fight, flight, freeze, it also makes clear thinking very difficult. There have been several things that I have kind of thought back on from those years that we were involved in caregiving and thought either, why didn't I think of that? You know, some sort of solution that in normal times would have come to me pretty easily. Or I can look back over my notes of something I did and think, you know, what was I thinking doing that? You know, you can just kind of look back and see that you weren't thinking clearly. And none of it was catastrophic. None of it was wrong. It was just maybe not the response I would have chosen if I had been 100% thinking clearly. One thing that I became frustrated with in caregiving was the idea of prevention versus crisis management. I personally am a very organized person, and I wanted to put a lot of effort into setting up an ideal situation, or as close as possible. I had a very specific idea of the kind of life that I wanted my elderly relatives to live. I wanted to make it as enjoyable and safe for them as possible. And I didn't mind putting in a lot of work to set that up. However, in some cases, we experienced that our relatives really didn't want organization, or that's the way it seemed at least. They wanted us to manage a crisis. So my husband and I at the time, we were both working full-time. Sometimes we didn't even live in the same town as the people that we were caring for, and we just couldn't drop everything to manage a crisis. So that was really frustrating to me because I wanted to have this beautiful system and everything would just, you know, run perfectly. And that's somewhat unrealistic, but you can implement a lot of things to make this go more smoothly. And I think our relatives just kind of wanted to, they kind of had more of a take it as it comes attitude. And I don't think either one is necessarily wrong. It was just difficult and frustrating sometimes to not have the same perspective. And one of the things that I would say to myself, and that I've said to people over the years, is I do believe that people are entitled to the dignity of their own choices. I'm not talking about people that are hurting other people, but you know, if it's just a decision about their own life, I think people should have the dignity of their own choices, whether, you know, anybody else agrees with that or not. I think people should get to make those choices. So that was just some of the friction that kind of made caregiving difficult in some instances. So the way that we dealt with that, we kind of had a strategy. When our relative would bring a problem to us, a lot of times that person already had the solution in mind that they wanted. And that's okay. But what I learned to do is just slow that whole process down and disrupt that fight, flight, freeze response and think about all the possible options and try to figure out what would be the best or what we could all live with as an option. And, you know, sometimes it was the option that the person had in mind from the beginning. Sometimes that person just didn't know all the options. And so, you know, we would kind of, you know, think of all of our choices and come up with, again, the one that we could all live with and agree to pursue. And a lot of that is thinking about what you as the caregiver are able to realistically do and what you're willing to do. So hopefully as you walk through this experience, you are on a team of caregivers, because it's just too much for one person. It's really too much for two people. And I'm not always great at asking for help, and I'm not great at delegating, but I can tell you 100% that if you can get some productive, helpful people on your team as you do caregiving, it will have tremendous benefits for your life, for your relative's life, for everyone's well-being. So the people on your team could either be other members of your family, or they could be people that work in different programs or agencies that assist with elderly people with caregiving. So there's several different ways to do that. Delegation is a tremendously helpful strategy. A division of labor is a beautiful thing. And so, yes, those things are difficult to do. Sometimes, again, for me, it's difficult to do because of my personality. I'm not a good delegator. I always have to work on delegating and trying to figure out how I can receive help from other people, because people want to help you. It's just sometimes difficult to accept that. So delegation and dividing up the jobs sometimes can be difficult to do, and sometimes it's not always possible. Your situation is your situation. But I definitely recommend that if you have that option, to delegate and to divide up the jobs. And so here's some things to think about in terms of dividing up the jobs. Some of the things that probably need to be done: cleaning, housekeeping, groceries, financial tasks. There's a lot of financial tasks, medical, and then like social, having visits, doing outings, those kinds of things. So if you can kind of, and I'm sure there are more areas that I didn't think of to mention, but if you can a strategy that I have seen work really well is for one person to kind of take one of those areas, and that's kind of their thing. So I've seen that be beneficial in caregiving situations before, so you might think about that. So if you have a division of labor and something has come up in your caregiving life that somebody needs, that's a question to kind of slow down that emergency response. Is this mine to do? So if you're in charge of the housekeeping and the cleaning, and there needs to be a medical appointment, or there needs to be some groceries bought, and that's not part of your area, you just need to ask yourself, is this mine to do? And don't feel bad handing whatever that task is off to the person that's their area, because they're going to do the same thing to you. When it comes time for something in your area to be done, they're going to get in touch with you, and they're going to say, I think XYZ needs to be done, and can you handle that? So it's a give and take in the best situation, in the ideal situation. So before I get to some practical tips, I wanted to do a self-care check-in question. And my self-care check-in question is, if you are doing caregiving, if you are burned out with caregiving, what is one thing you can do for yourself today? And that could be something that you do to prepare to do something for your family member. It could be something purely for yourself. So again, what is one thing you can do for yourself today if you're burned out with caregiving? And if you're a parent and you're burned out with caregiving, if you maybe have a child with a disability, you're burned out with caregiving. Again, of course, most of what we've been talking about is family members, elderly relatives, whoever you are assisting. What is one thing you can do for yourself today? So I'm going to give you some thoughts on that. Could you just kind of make a list? If you have 17 bits and pieces of things that need to be done in your mind? Could you just make a list? Could you just brain dump and make a list so that you don't lose any of that you know needs to be done? And that's enough. Just to make the list is enough. Could you, if you've made your list, could you just take the first step of something? Could you make that phone call? Could you put those groceries away? Could you just take that first step? Could you buy yourself some flowers? If that makes you feel good, could you just, when you're at the grocery store, could you buy yourself some flowers? If that would give you some joy and would be something that would be comforting to you, could you do that? Similarly, could you listen to some music you liked? Could you rent a DVD at the Redbox? Like, what small thing could you do for yourself that would be comforting? Could you call someone and vent? And you can let that person know, I know you can't solve it, I can't solve it, but I just need to vent. Or you can call someone and you can let them know that you're open to advice. They may have some sort of brilliant solution that you just can't see because you're so up to your neck in everything. We talked in some previous videos about a performance bonus. Is there something that you need to do that you're dreading? If there is, can you give yourself a performance bonus afterwards? So if it's a phone call you don't want to make, if you think you're going to be on hold for however long and you don't want to do it, could you motivate yourself to do it with a performance bonus? That could be going to get coffee afterwards. That could be ordering dinner out instead of cooking. I know it's a different world right now with COVID-19, but at least in my area, you can still call in for dinner and go pick it up. Is that something you could do to take a little bit of something off yourself? One of my favorites was when we were taking care of our elderly relatives and they lived quite a distance away, and I knew, and I didn't dread going down there, but there were times that I knew I had a lot to do when I got there. And so if I went there and I did all those things or did the best I could on them, on the way home, since it was a lengthy drive, I would stop at the Sonic and get my favorite drink. Now, is that a big deal? No, it's not. But it was something that made me feel better. And if it was happy hour, even better. So those are just some little small things that might be the answer for you to the self-care check-in question today, which is, what is one thing you could do for yourself today if you are burned out with caregiving? So just think about that. So here's some practical suggestions and thoughts. Do everything you can to get quality sleep. Sleep is foundational to your body staying healthy. There are so many mechanisms that go on during your sleep. And one of them that my mother, I think I mentioned this in another video, my mother always told me when I was little and I kind of had hit the wall at the end of the day, she would say, this is going to look better to you in the morning. So if you are just done, get yourself some sleep, even if it's just a nap in the afternoon. If you have that opportunity, do that. Get some sleep. And more than likely, when you wake up, you're going to feel some better. Even if it's just that you feel rested and the problem's the same and you don't have any more answers, at least you'll feel more rested. So, good sleep. Do whatever you can to get some good quality sleep. Cannot stress enough the importance of good nutrition. Drinking plenty of water. Eating nourishing meals. Not skipping meals. Even if you have to order it out, get yourself something to eat. You have time to stop and get something to eat. Importance of good nutrition. If you have the opportunity to assist your loved one in getting their legal house in order, it can be tremendously helpful. It is not the be-all, end-all that people act like it is sometimes. I remember when we were going through that and people just acted like if you had a will and a power of attorney and a living will or healthcare power of attorney, you were just set. And I did not find that to be the case. I would not have wanted to have gone through that experience without those documents, but it didn't solve everything. But it was very helpful. So a will, power of attorney, and a living will or healthcare power of attorney. They may call it something different, but those are really good documents to have prepared so that it's all on paper. Everybody knows what's what. And especially in the case of your loved one not being able to have the capacity to make decisions, they've already had that conversation with somebody and you have a good idea of what they would want. And sometimes if you have a situation where your family member is in the hospital, sometimes hospitals will have additional documents, which can just kind of be an interview of different scenarios and what they want in that case. Whatever you need to do, just try to get as much of that filled out on record. Keep yourself copies, have a good filing system as possible so that you know what you're supposed to do in that situation. And another tip is to keep those documents somewhere, whether it's in your car, whether it's right inside the door at your house, so that if an emergency comes up and you have to quickly get somewhere, you know exactly where those documents are and you have them to hand to the doctor, people at the hospital, whatever, so that they can quickly make copies and everybody's on the same page. You don't want to be searching for those things in that moment. So do your future self a favor and figure out where you can keep those things and be able to grab them very quickly if you need to go somewhere really fast in an emergency. Medical, a couple of tips for medical. If you're the person in charge of the medical procedures, it's really good to have more than one person go to a doctor's appointment and listen and ask questions. So, you know, if that is your family member and then 2 more people, that's okay. I just find that it's really helpful. The more people that hear it, sometimes people will hear things in different ways. The more people that are there to clarify exactly what they're saying about what the diagnosis is or the treatment process, whatever. I have found it extremely helpful for there to be multiple people there to hear all the information from the doctor and be able to ask questions. I cannot stress enough to you the seriousness of dehydration and also urinary tract infections for elderly people. Both of those things can make an elderly person not have any sanity whatsoever. I mean, they will say things that make no sense. And so if you're in a situation like that with an elderly relative and they have never had a diagnosis of dementia or any of those dementia related conditions, if they're saying things that don't make a lot of sense, that would be the first question I would ask myself. Is it possible that they're dehydrated? Is it possible that they have a urinary tract infection? Those things are very common for elderly people and they can really wreak havoc. So try to remember that. It's easy to forget, but try to remember those 2 things as kind of your rule outs for something really going awry with your relative. Try to keep a current list of their prescriptions. I know those things can change a lot. They can be on a lot of medicines, but it's good to have that with you, whether it's, you know, even just in a note on your phone, or if you just take a picture of all the bottles and you have that in a file on your phone. Find some way to have their list of their prescriptions. If you have a team of caregivers, communication is key, and you can do that in a lot of different ways. You can have maybe not right now, but in normal times, you could have a family dinner, a family meeting where everybody's face to face and you can all talk about, you know, everything that's going on. It's wonderful if the person in question, the family member, is still able to be involved and, you know, contribute to that discussion. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes not. But whether it's a face-to-face, whether it is a video call, some sort of video call, whether it's email, texting, just try to stay in as much communication as you possibly can so that everybody's on the same page. Sometimes when you are doing caregiving, there can be what is called decision fatigue. Like you're just so tired of making decisions. I'm sure that is the case in parenting sometimes. I know it can be the case with caregiving for family members. You just feel like you don't want to make one more decision. When I was in this situation, sometimes my mom would just call me and she wouldn't ask me. She would just say, I'm making your dinner tonight. And sometimes she would just decide what she was making just because she knew that you can just get to where you can't decide one more thing. So, some things, some life hacks to cut down on decision fatigue. If you are responsible for the groceries, do something like ClickList. Do something with grocery delivery. Certainly maintain the list of what you get in your house a lot, what your relatives get in their house. Some of these delivery programs, ClickList, you can have your shopping list where you can save everything that you usually get. It might be a little bit of work to set up on the front end, but you'll be doing your future self a favor, not having to try to remember what those things are, what those particular brands are, whatever that you need to get. Amazon. I know Amazon is different right now just because, some things you can't even order on Amazon right now, but especially if it's a situation where your relative is in a facility and it's far away, Amazon, especially if you're a Prime member, 2-day shipping is a beautiful thing. If that's the best way to do it, it's easy to ship something, and sometimes you can ship it for free and it'll be there very quickly. So we did that quite a few times in our caregiving life. Either you or your relative can have what's called a capsule wardrobe or a uniform, like just things that they wear all the time, things that you wear all the time. And so there's not a whole lot of hemming and hawing about what am I going to wear. If they always, especially if your relative stays home all the time and they don't ever go anywhere, pajama pants and top. Easy, things that are easy to pull on, just, having those things and just being able to quickly pull whatever it is either you want to wear or to get that person dressed. Okay? There are lots of regulations around nursing homes. There are not as many regulations for assisted living. We dealt with assisted living and we had a really wonderful experience with it, but I'm just here to tell you there are not as many regulations. Sometimes that can be good, sometimes that cannot be good. And there can be a lot of guilt and a lot of anxiety around whether someone goes to a nursing home or an assisted living, but there also can be kind of this fantasy or false expectation that changing that person's place of residence is going to solve everything, and it's not. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not going to solve everything. It's really important to stay in contact, even if right now you can't go see your relative at the nursing home or you can't go see them at the assisted living. It's really important to still be in contact. If you can go in person, that's wonderful. If you can call on the phone and just do a check-in, that's great. And it doesn't have to be every single day. I mean, you just have to evaluate your situation and figure out what you can do. But it's good for your relative to know that you're still around. It's good for the staff at the facility to know. It's good for them to know who to call when they need somebody. It's good for your relative to have something to look forward to in the coming days. So it's good in a lot of reasons, for a lot of reasons. We talked a little bit about your own state of mind as you do this. Good night's sleep can give you some perspective. We already talked about that. Think about if you are feeling super worn down, super run down. Are you hungry? Are you hangry? How is your self-talk? Are you being super critical? Are you being super hard on yourself for things that you really can't control? Is there anything you can say to yourself to affirm yourself? You know, even if it's a doctor's appointment that you're dreading, either because it's really difficult to get your relative there, or you're thinking there's going to be some bad news. Something simple like, you know, you can do this. Just saying to yourself in your own mind, you can do this. Or, you got this, girl. Or, you're doing good, girl. Or something like, you're doing everything you can to make sure your relative has the best life possible. These are things that you should be saying to yourself. So be sure to affirm yourself and not have yourself feeling guilty and criticized all the time when you are doing the best you can. Don't forget about support groups or your employee assistance program if you have one, or the local senior center. A lot of times there are different programs available in all those areas. Counseling, you may be able to get some counseling sessions. There may be caregiving seminars, support groups. Sometimes you can go sit in a support group and hear some really good ideas that you never would have thought of before. This one is golden. If your relative is a veteran, you definitely want to do research into what is available to assist you and your family through the Veterans Administration, through the VA. Some of the things could, and we've experienced this, some of the things could be prescriptions, even for things like if your relative needs diapers or pull-ups, they may have a social worker or a case manager that can help you access some different resources. There are facilities through the Veterans Administration, long-term care, nursing homes, those kinds of things if you need that. And then even after your relative dies, there are different programs to assist you in that situation. You can get a headstone, you can get a flag, you can get a certificate to honor your relative. There's a whole lot of, they may be able to be buried in a veterans cemetery. Their spouse may be able to be buried there too. There's a whole lot of things that you may be able to access through the VA. So if your relative is a veteran, please think about looking into that. You're probably going to need their DD-214, which is their discharge papers. But that can be an absolute game changer to get involved with the VA. If you get to a situation where hospice is the suggestion, I know that people can feel like that is awful, and it is very sad. Don't get me wrong. A lot of this is very sad, and I'm not trying to put some sort of Pollyanna spin on it. But I can say, if you get to a situation where hospice is an option, in my particular experience, it has been a gift from God. You can have hospice at a facility. You can have hospice in your home. There are a lot of things available through hospice, just like the VA. There are support groups. The hospice that we used had a chaplain that came and visited our relative while he could still kind of converse, and that was really important to him. He was a very social person, and so having a visit meant a lot to him. So try not to close your mind to the possibility of hospice. It may not be right for your family, but it may be more helpful than you could ever imagine. So just think about that. So I'm going to wrap it up. Again, this was a longer session because I have a lot to say about caregiving, and I hope this has been helpful. So here are the 3 things I'm going to leave with you today. Here's the quote. This is one of my favorite quotes about caregiving, and it was the author Ann Patchett, and you may know her. She has an independent bookstore in Nashville called Parnassus Books, and she writes books, and this was in one of her essays about her relationship with her grandmother. And here's what she said. These moments are the foundation upon which we build the house that will shelter us into our final years, so that when love calls out, how far would you go for me? You can look it in the eye and say truthfully, further than you would have ever thought possible. And again, that was Ann Patchett. And the book is called This is the Story of a Happy Marriage. It's a wonderful book. I've read it, and it's a collection of her essays and newspaper articles, and it was really good, and I think a lot about reading it again every once in a while. But I think that's a really important point, and that's something that I haven't said in all this, is that caregiving is very difficult, but I will say it has been one of the greatest honors of my life to have been in that situation. So that might be the end result of your self-care, is that you can kind of bring yourself back to that perspective that you are helping someone that you dearly love and someone who has been a huge part of your life to really have the best last few days that they could possibly have. So the song that I'm going to leave you with is Lori Morgan, and it's called Half Enough. So I'll post that on the comments, and it's just kind of a appreciation song. It's to her fans, but if you listen to it, I think that you may feel that sentiment toward your family member that you're taking care of, and I am 100% positive that they feel that way towards you for all that you're doing to help them have a good life. So Half Enough by Lori Morgan. And I don't really have a laughter video today, but I wanted to share something with you that I've been enjoying as we've been going through COVID-19, and that is Rachael Ray, the cookbook author. She's got a lot of different businesses, but Rachael Ray, she has been making stay home videos, and a lot of them I see on Instagram. So if you're on Instagram, you might want to subscribe to her and watch her stay home videos. A lot of times they're in her stories, but I found one on YouTube that I'll link, and it's just nice. She does recipes, but she also does kind of question and answer, and this is one of the ones where she does a couple of questions, and she actually kind of has some good self-care tips in there. So I'm going to link that on the comments on Facebook on the videos. And that's what I have to say about self-care. That's some of the things I have to say about self-care. I could probably talk about this all day. And I appreciate you guys watching. And you're always welcome to comment on Facebook if there's something you'd like me to cover in these videos. But know that if you are doing caregiving, you are so, so valuable. And I want you to really take good care of yourself, because you are worth it. Number one, that's the most important reason, is you are worth it. But also, you will be so much more present for your family member, and it will be such a much more pleasant experience if you can be rested and calm. So, if all hearts and minds are clear, y'all take good care, and I will see you back here tomorrow.